Welcome to my channel. Bienvenue sur ma chaîne. Today, Canto 3, I'm going to talk a bit and read a couple of poems. Talk about my wife's final words to me before she died. And two poems on that topic. Before I do that, I'm just going to get out of the way for a second. I'll let you look at a couple of her artworks. Gabrielle was interested in connection, and here you have a couple of good examples of one of her drawing, one of a painting. I'm a psychotherapist, and I had the painting of the two hands that you see in my office for many years. Some of you will, of course, notice the reference to the Sistine Chapel by Michelangelo. But Gabrielle was interested in all kinds of connection, not just sacred or spiritual connection, also emotional connection, also carnal connection. And she did it with great simplicity and great gusto. So I think I'll start by reading you a poem. I'm going to put a piece of toilet paper right over top of the camera here so that I don't look at myself. I'm going to read you first a poem about her final words. And then I'm going to talk about trauma misinformed medicine for a little while, because there was a couple of pretty outrageous breaches of human treatment by the medical team and by her gynecologist. Although I'm sure they weren't intending to do that. I think it was ignorance, but it was still pretty horrific. So I'd like to talk about that a bit because I think it's very important. I worked in a hospital for 30 years. And although the medical side of things generally is pretty good in our hospital system here, the human side of things still has a lot of work to do. And I certainly experienced that firsthand. Middle of COVID, you could kind of cut them some slack, but I'm not willing to cut them as much slack as they took. So here's the first poem, and it references my wife's final 3 words to me when she was delirious. She'd been delirious for days at this point and not totally with it. The poem is called Fuck. I said in another poem, your last words to me were, let's go. But it might have been come on, and it might have been fuck. I could see you were pissed at me and didn't want to take death lying down. Death had its own plans. I tried to help. I sat you up on the side of the hospital bed. Then I tried to stand you up like shoelaces. Your legs dangled underneath you until my strength failed and I sat you back on the bed. Then you looked up at me through an opiate haze. Your eyes burned with rage and defiance. I imagined words, betrayer, traitor, but all I heard you say was, come on, let's go, fuck. So I'm going to talk a little bit about 2 things that happened that were right at the beginning, at the Gabrielle's diagnosis of stage 4 ovarian cancer, and right at the end, just before when I had to make a decision for her not to have an operation and put her through more pain and suffering. So she was diagnosed on December the 21st, 2019. She'd had a polyp removed from her cervix the previous Friday. And on the 21st, right before the Christmas holidays, her gynecologist on a Friday afternoon. I was at work and had a busy afternoon. I'm a psychotherapist, or I was a psychotherapist, and I had clients at 1, 2, 3, and 4. Her gynecologist chose to call her on the phone and give her the diagnosis over the phone at lunch hour on the 21st of December. I was at work. So from 1 to 3, when I just happened to check my messages, I don't usually, but I did, on that particular day, probably because someone was late showing up, she'd just been given the worst news of her life over the phone and was alone with that news for 3 hours. And I'll never forget the howl of anguish, fear, terror, and pain when I heard the message. Of course, I rushed right home. But we were deprived by that decision of the opportunity to howl with fear and anguish and terror together. She was left alone for 3 hours, and that still bothers me a lot. And I still feel very badly that it happened. It wasn't my fault, but what the hell? I still feel responsible in some way. So that was the first. The last major screw up, or big screw up, in my opinion, was right at the end, the decision not to give her an operation to repair a perforated intestine. Her last lucid day, I wasn't allowed in the hospital because they were only allowing visitors every second day, and because she wasn't expected to die, there wasn't any accommodation made. Although I think it was quite predictable that if she had a blocked intestine and she had stage 4 ovarian cancer, there was a very good chance that she was going to have a perforated intestine. And if someone had bothered to think about it, they might have cut me a little slack there. And I would have spent her last lucid day with her rather than at home chatting with her on the phone a few times. Anyway, the next day when I was allowed in, there was a huge scene around the bed when I got there, and she'd had a heart arrest. The crash cart was in. There was a pile of other people out in the hall and around the bedside, and the crash cart team had arrived and got her heart going again. From then on, she was pretty much delirious. And just said the 3 words that I've just read to you. That afternoon, a decision had to be made as to whether to do an emergency operation and try and repair the perforated intestine. And that decision got made around the bedside. There was about 12 to 15 medical professionals there, and they showed up all in a group. Having had some kind of conflab without me present, but I was there, of course, with Gabrielle. They showed up at the bedside, gathered around the bedside, and there were 4 or 5 senior physicians there. Head of internal medicine, her oncologist, 2 oncologists, 2 of the staff oncologists were there. One of the surgeons, the doctor in charge of the floor, along with residents, various people who weren't introduced to me. They then proceeded to tell me that it was up to me to decide whether this operation should take place, because they decided that Gabrielle wasn't able to decide herself, which was quite true. She was delirious. However, I'm standing at the end of the bed, I'm looking at her, and her eyes are going around wildly, looking at these people and looking back to me. A couple of times she made a motion like this, as, get these people out of here. Or at least that's how I interpreted her gesture. So the decision, someone made a decision or didn't make a decision to have this conversation around the bedside. So everyone kind of chipped in and looked at me very earnestly and explained to me that this decision was entirely mine. And then they all, in their subtle ways, pointed me towards not having the operation. And I think, sort of emphasized that situation is terminal, and not, you can do the operation, but she has terminal metastatic cancer, and she's delirious, she's fighting off an infection, she's septic. Probably the operation isn't going to give her much more time, and probably it's not going to give her any quality time at all. We might get another week or two. Maybe she would have got lucid and we could have had a conversation, that's something. However, I'm watching her eyes, watching these people, and every time a different person spoke, her eyes would look at that person speaking. So I think, pretty sure she had some idea of what's going on. And you have to understand, my wife is a trauma survivor. She was abused. And if you're a victim of trauma, one of the things that scares you the most is having other people having control over your body, and feeling helpless because you don't necessarily trust other people. It takes a lot to get over that. And, people who've, like myself, who've grown up where, for the most part, other people are in my family and around me or on my side, we don't get it. We don't get just how terrifying it is. So my wife had many operations. She was always terrified of the anesthetic. She was terrified of airplanes for a similar reason. And she was terrified of dying because, of course, that's the ultimate loss of control over your body. So she's watching this, and she's watching me watching them, and I have to decide whether to put her through this operation or not. And I happen to agree with the medical people. I didn't think it was worth it, and I didn't think it would be doing her any favors to put her through that operation. However, it was atrocious that she had to watch me and that I had to make that decision in front of her. I find that appalling. For all I don't know what she thought. Perhaps she thought, well, the asshole, you're just going along with these people because they're all telling him what to do. Perhaps she felt abandoned. Perhaps her terror of dying made her feel like in the last hours of her days of her life, I had abandoned her, which isn't true. But I don't know what she felt because we couldn't have a conversation about it. If that conversation had happened in a different room, then I could have come back and I could have reassured her that we were doing everything we could to keep her comfortable, to keep her out of pain, and to get the best possible outcome for her. That would have been a very different message. But she had to watch me decide that we were going to basically starve and dehydrate her to death over the next 3 or 4 days. So, trauma, misinformed medicine, in my humble opinion. So now I'll read you the poem that I wrote for the funeral. It was my eulogy to my amazing partner. It's called Let's Go. The cello lies asleep in its case. The thread unravels at the sleeve. Crows gather in random trees. The ice grinds loud on the lake. Let's go where we won't be seen, my love. Let's go wherever you will. Let's visit, abide, or ride, my love. Let's ride on the waves and the tide. You took me off on all those sweet trips where the love and the joy reside. You took me up so damn many hills and down on the other side. You hauled me out for 1,000 swims in the heat and the cool and the cold. You hauled me into a field full of bloom and taught my eyes to be bold. Then you took me fast to honor the light. Then you took me slow to honor the night, where only the bravest go. You took me too with a grain of salt, a man, a ridiculous thing, then said, let's go, with your joyful smile and that simple, fresh look like the spring. There was wonder and joy most days, my love. Struggle and pain most days, though you barely mentioned it. Instead, you'd say, come on, let's go, to me or the dog or the day, and lead me into the field or the woods. Look, 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 you'd say. So where are we going now, my love? Where are we going today? Wherever it is, I won't let go, as you never once let go. Let's go, let's go, let's go.